Hey there, welcome to Board Game Hot Takes, the podcast where we give our immediate reactions to the hottest board games just minutes after playing them. My name's Adam.
And this is Chris.
And this is Tim.
We're going to give our hot takes on the game that we just finished playing, Cascadia.
Before we jump into the conversation on Cascadia, I've got some news and a poll to discuss. I was recently invited to be a guest on the Board Game Community Show by the host Riley Stock. Riley interviews board game personalities, including game designers, reviewers, and other content creators for his show, and he's just about the nicest person in board gaming. That episode should have released on September 3rd, just a few days before this episode is available. So if you're interested in our conversation about objectivity and reviews, why I don't mind sharing my social viewpoints with our audience, and some wacky theme ideas, go check it out. Now, let's get into some of our poll results. So I asked a question on Twitter this week: which kind of card game is your favorite? And I said, I have a long history with CCGs, which are collectible card games, but I find that my favorite elements of those can often be distilled into a deck builder. So I kind of explained the terminology, but I offered these options. Number 1, collectible card games. Number 2, deck building games. Number 3, living card games. And number 4, traditional card games. Before I get into the results here, let me ask you guys a question. Do those terms all make sense to you, or do I need to get into some of them a little bit? Are there any? Do you have any questions about those terms, or had you not heard those before?
I always see them in passing, and I'm like, oh, TCG, that means T card game. And LCG, oh, that means whatever an L card game is. I know there's some variety of card game, but I don't necessarily know what they are. I think a LCG is like a living card game. You have to keep buying like a bunch of packs as they come out to keep up with it or something. And so I don't really know. I just know there's some sort of card game, and beyond that, I just don't take the time to figure out what they are.
All right. So Adam is a host on a board game podcast, and he doesn't understand the terminology. So let me play this out for everybody that's listening today. So a collectible card game is the type of card game where you're going and you're buying like a pack of cards, and you don't know what's going to be in it, and you're just hoping for that rare, awesome card that's worth a lot of money, is super powerful. And then once you get all the cards in the packs that you've bought, then you can put them together and build a deck. That's a collectible card game. And some examples of that are going to be like Magic the Gathering, Pokemon. Those are like your Yu-Gi-Oh! Those are your classic collectible card games. A deck building game, on the other hand, is typically a self-contained game. It's like a board game that has an element where everybody starts with a poor hand of cards that doesn't do much. And during the course of the game, you're going to build your deck up and make it stronger. You're going to have an opportunity to add cards to it. You're going to make it more powerful. So that's a deck building game.
I think Star Realms is an example of this. Am I correct?
Yes. Good.
All right. Got
Congratulations, Adam.
Thank you.
Adam, can you, as a for bonus points, can you name a second deck building game?
Oh man, Hero Realms, Cthulhu Realms, anything with realms on the end of it.
That's right. But also Clank, Dune Imperium. But, if we're talking about just card games, then Dominion is a great example of a game that is just about building your deck, along with Ascension. There's a ton of board games that you just buy a box and you can build a deck with it. So good job, Adam. Congratulations, you get a gold star.
Yes, thank you.
All right, the next one is a living card game. And this one's a little more unique and something that I've never actually had a chance to play. But a living card game is a type of game where you can buy a set of cards and you could probably play it right out of the box. But then later on, another set of cards might be released. And you can take those cards and you can add them. You can like make a deck out of the two sets of cards. And you know what you're getting when you buy the box. But then you can make that deck stronger. And as you buy more and more cards, you can either kind of mix up what you're playing with, or you can like combine them together in different combinations and stuff like that. So any examples of a living card game that you'd like to throw out?
I would have, from the way you just described it, I would have said that Star Realms also fits into that description, because you can buy the base deck and it's got all the cards you need to play a basic game. But then you can buy multiple expansions that you can add in with different cards. But I'm guessing that is not what you meant by a living card game.
Correct, because I'm terrible at descriptions and poll results.
Okay, what about, I feel like this is the wrong answer too, Android Netrunner.
Yeah, that would be a collectible card game.
No,
so I think there was two versions of that. So I think there was a collectible card game version of Android Netrunner, and then I think there was a living card game version of Android Netrunner. And now I think both of them are out of print, so you can't get any Android Netrunner anywhere. So good choice. A couple current versions of living card games include Marvel
Champions.
Marvel Champions. Thank you. Not Marvel United. Let's
No.
not go there. Marvel Champions, which is a card game where if you buy the base box, you've got a couple different villain decks you can play against, and then you've got a few different hero decks with some attributes that you can mix into them. But then if you buy another expansion, then you can switch up the deck. You can play another hero, but you can switch out the cards that kind of go along with it. So that's a living card game. Arkham Horror CCG or LCG, and I think Lord of the Rings was another one. And Fantasy Realms is known for doing these. So they're the primary company, I think, that's putting out living card games at this point. And then the last one, oh my God, we're still on terminology at this point, is I said a traditional card game. And by this, I mean like any kind of game that's a card-based game that doesn't shift. So, your classic one is that you buy a box of cards from the store and you can play hearts with it, you can play whatever. But also, The Crew is a great example of a card game that's just kind of self-contained. You don't change it during the game. It's just a trick-taking game that you buy. All right, now that we've gone through the terminology there, what were you guys' choices? Out of those 4 options, what would you pick as your favorite type of card game?
For me, I mean, that was a no-brainer. It's deck building games. Star Realms is my favorite game of all time. Let me see. The other ones, I've never played a collectible card game, although that sounds like it could be a lot of fun also. The living card game, I've never tried one. Traditional card games, I have absolutely zero interest in playing any of them because they bore me to tears. So that was an easy one. Adam, what about you?
For me, I said deck building also. That was a no-brainer for me. And it's largely, again, due to my inexperience with collectible or living. So I do have Android Netrunner Revised Core Edition, and I've played around with that a little bit. And as far as some of the other ones, I feel like the whole buying packs of cards to try to find this thing, I feel like I got my fix with that with baseball cards when I was a kid. And it feels just like a more of a business model kind of thing that I'm not really into supporting. I don't know if it's a close second, but a second would be your traditional card games. I love playing like spades and hearts, and we did a lot of that when I was deployed out to the Middle East. So traditional cards would be a second behind deck builders.
So I wonder if this was driven by the fact that, we're asking a crowd of people that play board games, and most of the board games that have cards in them end up being deck builders, like that's a modern thing. Because here's the poll results. Collectible card games, 5%. So probably the biggest group of card players in the world at this point are either traditional card game players or collectible card game players playing like Magic and stuff like that. But only 5% on collectible card games, CCGs. 77% on this poll answered deck building games. That blew me away because from my understanding, even a lot of like board game players don't like collectible card games deck builders because they're kind of random. They're kind of luck based, but apparently there's a pretty big group here from our poll respondents that really like deck building games. Living card games, 9%, and then traditional card games, 9%. So pretty clear winner in deck building games. Personally, I said deck building because I just love that experience. I got into the hobby because of CCGs. My favorite part of CCGs was the drafting process of it. Like you can open up a bunch of packs and then draft a pack where you take one card of the pack, you pass the rest to the person on your left, and you build a deck out of it. Deck building just like builds that into the game, and I love that, and it's so much fun.
Can I ask a question about that? So say like I'm assuming you're talking about Magic. So you open up a pack. How many cards is in a pack?
15 cards every time, and it's 1 rare, 3 uncommons, and 11 commons are in that pack.
Oh, so that's constructed. Each pack is constructed similarly. Okay.
One unique thing at about maybe 12 years ago, they started adding ultra rares in there. So maybe then every 10 packs would have an ultra rare instead of the rare in the pack as well. So then you got an even more unique distribution.
So one person to open one pack, another person to open the other pack, and then you draft back and forth.
Yeah, that is absolutely, for me, if you're into CCGs, if you're playing Magic the Gathering, try a booster draft. That is by far the most fun way to play that game. It balances everything out. It just makes it a fun little built-in experience, just like a deck builder in a standard board game today.
And just for me, that's just a totally foreign, new concept to me, something that I've never heard of until now. So
here's what we're going to do, guys. I'm going to teach you guys Magic the Gathering. We're going to do a booster draft out of my cube when we play in Palm Springs in a couple months, and you're going to find the joy of booster drafting a CCG. Okay. So just a couple respondents I'm going to mention here. This is a friend of mine from high school. Mike has been listening to our podcast since we first released it a little bit over a year ago, and he always drops notes to me. Him and I used to play Magic the Gathering years ago, but every once in a while he comments, he sends me a note. And so he said, so I had to vote for CCG because that's what I know, but I'm just starting Star Realms, so deck builders might become a new friend. So we introduced my old friend Mike to deck builders, and Mike, have fun with it. You're going to have a blast with it. I think you're going to love it. And looking forward to playing some Star Realms with you online if you get into it on the app. Scott P., who is actually the winner of our Frosthaven contest like several months ago. Of course, he won't get that Frosthaven pledge for like 6 months because Cephalofair is so far behind on that one. But Scott said, I played Magic for decades and only played modern board games for about 4 years. And I find I enjoy the variety of board games much more. I agree with Scott. I love modern board games, even though I love that hobby of CCGs. I love deck building because it kind of gives me that feel, but I get all the variety that goes with it. So, there's a whole bunch of other comments here, but we're going long on this segment. I'll just say that obviously for our poll respondents, deck builders are the way to go. So, all right, let's
right on.
Yeah, right on. So let's move on here to a description of Cascadia, and then we'll get into the conversation about the game.
In Cascadia, you are trying to curate the most diverse and interesting Pacific Northwest environment by drafting habitat tiles and wildlife tokens to meet variable scoring goals. Each player starts with a habitat tile that consists of 3 connected habitat hexes. Hexes may contain more than one type of habitat on it. Each habitat tile also contains 1 or more wildlife symbol types on it, and those are the only types of wildlife that can be placed on that particular tile. During your turn, you'll pick from a combination of 4 habitat tiles and wildlife tokens from a supply. You'll place the habitat tile adjacent to any of your existing habitat tiles, and you'll place the wildlife token on a habitat tile that has the related symbol. If you can't legally place a wildlife token that you picked up, return it to the bag to be drawn in a future turn. After you finish placing your tile and token, a new tile and token is replaced in the supply, so there are always 4 combinations available for the next player. If there are ever 4 of the same wildlife tokens in the supply, then you must draw 4 new wildlife tokens. If there are ever 3 of the same type, then the active player may draw new wildlife tokens, but it's up to the active player. If you place an animal on a tile that's indicated as a keystone tile, then you also receive a nature token. A nature token can be spent on your turn to take any one of 4 habitat tiles and any of the 4 wildlife tokens instead of the specific combinations that are in the supply. Or you can clear out all the wildlife tokens and replace them. The game ends when there are no more habitat tiles left to replace the last token taken. Each player will have exactly 20 turns. Players add up their scores for wildlife scoring bonuses they've achieved, for the largest number of tiles, each specific habitat type that is connected, bonus points for having the first or second most total of each specific habitat, and points for remaining nature tokens. And the player with the most points is the winner. Cascadia was designed by Randy Flynn with art by Beth Sobel, and it's published by Flatout Games.
All right, thanks, Chris. Let's get into the conversation and talk about the mechanisms and gameplay of Cascadia. So, Adam, let's start with you. What did you think about the gameplay and mechanisms of Cascadia?
Gosh, I love the gameplay here. It's simple, it's streamlined. You pick a combination, you line it up, match it up, and then you put the little circle animal on one of your available tiles, if that's an option. Otherwise, you just throw it back in the bag. It's just that simple mechanic of picking this little combination just spawns all this crazy puzzle and matching up with the tiles. It's so simple. Pick this and pick that. 1 hexagon, 1 circle. That stood out to me just brilliantly in its simplicity and I'm going to say it, buzzword, and its elegance.
Yeah, and I'm going to jump on that. It's okay because I think what this did that was unique to most games that are kind of like pick a tile, place a tile, right? Like, we've talked about, Castles of Burgundy in the past, right? You pick a tile and you place it in your supply, or Canvas, you pick a card and you're set up to place in the supply. This one gave you a combination of 2 in each situation. They're relatively simple decisions, but by adding those 2 together, it made it really fun. Like, am I doing 2 things that are good for me, or am I doing 1 thing that's really good for me and 1 that's not so great right now? Maybe it'll set me up later. That was such a fun decision. And on top of that, then you have the variable scoring kind of cards for all of the different wildlife types. And so every game is going to play it a little bit different depending on what wildlife types are up, but it was just so much fun to be like, okay, if I can get this landscape tile, then or habitat tile, then I'm going to be able to kind of add on to that and be the leader in the habitats. But I want this one type of wildlife because it's going to meet one of the scoring goals. So many fun decisions, fairly simple, but exciting. And I really liked how it played out. So Chris, now I'm really interested to hear what you think about this, because when we're sitting here playing the game, Chris is saying, this seems kind of like Calico, but one of these games is awesome, and one of them I'm not a big fan of. And I think Chris likes Calico. So I'm trying to understand how Chris had such a disconnect here, if I'm understanding right. So Chris, tell us about your feeling about the gameplay and mechanisms.
First, I feel like I have to walk back my comments during the game just a little bit because here I'll explain. So first of all, this is not my native habitat, so to speak. This is not my favorite type of game, the tile laying games, the puzzly type of games. And that should not be a surprise to any of you guys. And Calico, when I play that, I mean, I can recognize the excellence of that game, but it's not my favorite game, largely because it's the most concentrated possible version of that type of game, the tile laying game. You have a very limited area that you have to work in, and decisions that you're making are so specific and have to be so precise that it's incredibly challenging. And I recognize the excellence of that game, and it is a beautiful game, but it's not my favorite. I had a lot more fun playing Cascadia.
Oh my God. Okay, so you totally blew my mind here. I thought that you were trying to say that Cascadia was not a good game and Calico was an amazing game too, but you're saying that you actually liked Cascadia more than Calico.
I liked Cascadia a lot more, and I'll tell you why. One of the things that bothers me, there's two things that bother me about Calico. And again, one of them, it's the decision space, that there's a relatively limited number of decisions that you're trying to make. You're trying to either meet a specific design goal, you're trying to get the cats in the right place, or you're trying to match up to get a button. It felt to me like there was a lot more action and a lot more variety in Cascadia, because every game you're picking an entirely different type of goal based on the card. I think there's four or five. Is it four? Yeah.
5 types of wildlife, yeah.
Five types of wildlife, and there were cards you drew that were different, entirely different every game. And the other thing is the physical space that you're operating in. In Calico, you're operating in this very tiny space, which personally I find restrictive. I like the fact that it's essentially, to coin a term, it's an open world in Cascadia. You can place your tiles anywhere that you like, and you live with the consequences of that if you place them in the wrong place, then you may not end up getting optimal scoring, but you can put your tiles anywhere you like. And then the tokens on those are an additional challenge that I really like. And I feel like it creates a really optimal combination of play space and decisions to make that, to me, Calico feels too restrictive, more of a limited decision space, and I prefer Cascadia because of that.
Chris, you touched on it. I'm going to say, for me, this game felt like absolute freedom for a tile laying game. So your only restriction is which tile and which animal, which combination you want to take. And then if you have a nature token, it doesn't mean you have no more restrictions on that either. You can put it anywhere you want. And like you said, you might shoot yourself in the foot, but I don't care. Like, give me this thing and let me put it wherever I want. Let me build my own little landscape. It was freaking awesome. And that's just, I don't know if it's an illusionary, a false sense of freedom, but it's the sense that I got from this game, and it was wonderful.
Well, and I'm curious to hear Tim's thoughts on it, because I know you really do enjoy Calico as well, and I'm curious to hear how you thought it compared to Cascadia.
I do really like Calico, and you're absolutely right. This game does not have the restrictive nature that Calico does. And I think that normally I would say that I enjoy what Calico is doing. It's kind of restricting your space there, and I do like it. But I think Cascadia has enough unique combinations of decisions you have to make every turn that even though you're not restricted by what you can do, you still have to think hard about what the right strategic decision is. And so I think it kind of enforces that restriction in a different way. It makes you have to think about two different things, and the size of your land, the habitat, versus what the scoring positions of the animals are. So it doesn't restrict you, right? It's wide open. But if you want to do well at it, you better be thinking carefully about both those things. You cannot just willy-nilly throw a tile out and throw an animal somewhere else. You have to be planning every one of those. And so, man, it was so fun. To be honest, I don't know that I could say what my favorite of the two is. These are both amazing games. They feel very different, even though they have almost the same mechanisms. And I love them both for different reasons. So I thought Cascadia was great. I thought Calico was great. And now I'm in a bind as far as how to rate these two games against each other, because I think they're both fantastic.
So this may be a bit of a stretch, but thematically, what we've been talking about here is perfectly appropriate because in Cascadia, you're dealing with, the great outdoors, you're dealing with habitat and wildlife, and there shouldn't be any restrictions on where these things can go. As opposed to Calico, where you're making a quilt and you inherently have a defined workspace to operate in. So I think that's really interesting.
It sounds like a great personality test. I could dingle one of these in front of everybody. Which one are you going to take? Are you freedom or you want the restriction of having to build a quilt and operate in a little set environment? Whereas do you want to go to outdoors, experience freedom and run free and have no limits? I need to try Calico and see how much, if I get the Chris feeling on it.
I think there are some differences thematically in which one felt more thematic to me, but we're going to jump into that in a bit. Do you guys have any other mechanisms before we talk about theme and production?
I was going to ask, because I have a little bit of an example of player interaction here. Did you guys get any sense? I have a surprise reveal for my player interaction piece on this. What about Chris?
I can't not compare this again to Calico. In Calico, it's actually pretty cutthroat because you can really easily see what your opponents are trying to do, because there's a relatively small number of things they can do, and it's pretty easy to look at the tiles and say, oh yeah, I see what Tim's looking for, so I'm going to snatch up that tile, and he's not going to get it, and I'm going to hose him. As opposed to Cascadia, where there's so many different directions that you could go, it's possible that I could identify what, Adam's big strategy is, or Tim's, and try to stop them. But for one, they can probably pivot to something else, or two, I have to focus so much on what I'm trying to get accomplished that I really have to focus more on accomplishing my goals rather than stymieing somebody else's. So I felt like the player interaction was less in Cascadia, but there was a little bit less of a cutthroat feel in Cascadia as well.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that you could clearly intentionally interrupt what the other players were doing in Calico more than you could Cascadia. But Cascadia did have those kind of scoring bonuses for having the most of a landscape type. And so at least it drove you to kind of at least pay attention to what other people were doing. And I was doing that, but I was never watching to say like, okay, I need to take this because Adam's going to grab it. Like that was never happening for me, at least in a first play. That might come up a little bit more once you get to know the game. And if there was kind of some indifferent decisions to say like, well, I don't care which tile it is, so how can I block somebody else? With Calico, it's very obvious by, the last third of the game, what you needed to take to stop someone else from getting their goals.
Oh, let me just add one thing to that. And I think that the Cascadia version of it is actually much more pleasant to me as a player, because I don't want to have to pay a ton of attention in a game like this to what my opponents are doing. Games where you have your own board and you're trying to accomplish your own thing, like Wingspan, Cascadia, Calico. These are all games where I don't want to have to keep tabs on every move that my opponent's making. I want to be able to focus on my tableau and making that as optimal as I possibly can. Yeah, so Adam, what's your take on it?
Yeah, so admittedly, I think the player interaction is relatively low, but I found myself watching the player right before me, which in this case was you, Chris. We were kind of in a salmon battle, and the pieces got pretty tight at the end where everyone was looking for the last salmon to make that 7 salmon river. At least you and I were, Chris. And neither one of us got it, but you were snatching up all these great salmon pieces that would have fit right in my landscape. And I think this will tie into moments of the game for me. But I think in future plays, I would be a lot more aware of what the person prior to me is going for and maybe pivot my strategy to avoid conflicting with that person.
Yeah, I think it was interesting enough to pay attention to what other people were doing without being very competitive. Calico was just a little bit higher on that mark. And honestly, Adam, for that reason, I think you might actually like Calico a little bit more, because I know you like heavy player interaction and being able to block other people. You can do that more in Calico than you can here.
Okay.
All right, well, let's talk about the production and theme. And I want to start with theme here because I think, I know this is a review on Cascadia, but we keep talking about Calico here because they're so close in so many ways, but also they feel really different. And theme is one of the ways that I actually feel like Cascadia is very much an abstract game. I don't see how what you're doing mechanically in the game ties into the theme, even though it's a nice, pleasant Pacific Northwest wildlife theme, versus Calico, you're making a quilt and you gotta meet the goals that you're trying to do with that quilt. And so there's, at least for an abstract game, I feel like Calico has a little bit of a theme tied into the mechanisms, and Cascadia, there's nothing thematic about it I didn't care. Like, for me, that's not important. But Chris, I want to hear what you think about that, because I know theme is important to you. This was a very abstract game. How did you feel about that? Did it bother you, or are you just like all into the game mechanisms here and didn't care?
Honestly, it did bother me a little bit, but I thought the game mechanisms made up for it. Some things seem like they could have been very easily made heavily thematic, like the type of habitat that a particular animal goes in, but strangely, it seemed less so than one might think. So, for example, you had these prairie tiles, and you had salmon in the prairie tiles. Now, I'm not a wildlife biologist or a fisheries management specialist, but I don't think that salmon spend a lot of time in prairies. They spend more time in water. And yet I had water tiles that didn't allow salmon, and I had prairie tiles that did. So I'm not sure what the thinking was there, or maybe there's just some aspect of salmon biology that I'm missing, but that struck me as a little bit strange.
I was wondering if you were going to bring up the prairie salmon, and I'm glad that you did. So yeah, it didn't strike me as an abstract game, Tim, until you said, "Hey guys, this game's an abstract game." And I was like, "Oh, it totally was." But still, the Cascades evoke that kind of feeling for me. I love that region of the country, and I want to go hang out there and hike. So despite its abstract nature, the theme is still something that did pull me in, even though there was not much tie-in to the gameplay at all. Steve was saying some of these, on the actual production of this thing, are like, there's a lot of wood involved, and
Yeah, I'm guessing for the, kind of the cost of this game and what you're expecting out of a box of this, it sounds like it's a really solid production. We played on Tabletopia tonight. The tiles, I really like the tiling aspect where you're trying to build your habitats, kind of fitting those landscapes together and making something that felt like it fit together. I love that in a tile-laying game, and this worked well. I loved my little habitat where I had this big, long desert, but I also had a nice river running down the edge of it. And I hated Steve's habitat where he had like 15 random things all pressed up against each other, and there was no like big connections to them. So I like a game where the game mechanisms kind of drive me to make something that feels satisfying. And I think this did that. But from a production perspective, my understanding is that the animal tokens are wood in the box, and that just sounds like a nice upgrade right out of the box that you wouldn't expect from something of this cost and this size.
Now, I will say there is some thematic tie-in in the way that the animals were scored. So I think the salmon, they kind of went in like a river, and then the elk, you got more if they were in a line, kind of like a herd or like they were migrating. And the hawks, they all had their own kind of territory. So the way Tim, you built your habitat was cool. You had all these hawks kind of on the outskirts patrolling everything. And I don't know. So there was a little bit of thematic tie in there, which I thought was neat.
And I'm glad you mentioned that, because that is actually one of my favorite things about a game like this, right? It's an abstract game, and this is kind of tied into the mechanisms, but the scoring, the wildlife scoring that we got this game was randomly set up. We played the starter game, so it was all the A tiles, but there's 4 different tiles for each of the 5 animal types, or 4 different scoring cards. And so if you just randomly chose a different scoring card for each of the animals, it's going to be completely different scoring every time you play that. And I love that. I love that every time you're sitting down, you got to reassess, okay, what's important to me? What do I have to do to make it work? This puzzle all fit together. I sat down, the first couple turns we were taking this, and I was just like, okay, I've got this one thing. I'm going to put a couple bears together. Like, that's my whole goal this game. I only ended up with 2 bears the entire thing, because then I started to see the other pieces of the puzzle come together, and I was like, oh, wait, but there's a couple elk together, so I can line those up. And hey, there's a salmon sitting over there. And it was so fun to try to discover that, like that puzzle during the course of the game and figure it out. And I think every game is going to play out a little bit different because of those unique scoring tiles. So they are thematic, but also fun that it was unique and that we get to try something different the next time we played it.
Yeah, and I appreciated the fact that for every one of those scoring cards, there actually was some biological truth behind what they were talking about. So, for example, the salmon run and the mating pairs of bears that you were trying to set up, or the solitary hawk. All of that made sense thematically from an ecological standpoint. I thought that was really nice.
All right, cool. So why don't we jump out into standout moments of the game today? So, Chris, anything that stood out to you while we were playing today?
Yeah, there was one moment that was just, an absolute heartbreak. Going back to sort of mechanisms for a second, but there's so many different ways to score in this game that you really do have to pick 1 or 2 and focus on them. And that's going to have to, you're going to have to focus on those in order to optimize scoring, because the scoring is not linear. The more you get of a certain thing, certain track, it's going to increase exponentially. And my goals were all about salmon. Adam mentioned already, so he and I were kind of in a salmon war. I had 6 salmon in a salmon run, and if you had 7, you maximize scoring. That was the max number. And I was waiting for that last salmon, and we were closing in at the end of the game, and I had a space ready to accept a salmon at the end of my salmon run, and I kept waiting, and salmon weren't showing up. And then finally, about 2 turns from the end, I said, I can either keep waiting for a salmon and take a chance that I'm going to get that salmon and really kill it on the points for the salmon, or I can fill that space with a hawk that's going to get me some points, but it's not really going to kill it. It was heartbreaking having to put that hawk in the salmon spot, but it got me some points, and in the end, a salmon never showed up. So it was the right decision to make, but it was so hard to do, and it was truly heartbreaking having to do that. So, but that stuck with me.
Unlike you, Chris, I stuck with it and tried to find that salmon, and it just did not happen for me. There was one point in the middle of the game, and it's the moment of the game for me. You took this beautiful tile that had room for a salmon on it, and I think it was also like a mountain in a stream, or like the perfect tile to fill out my landscape and just make these huge segments connect, make my 2 little runs of 3 salmon on each side into a full 7 salmon run, and a cascade of points would have rained upon me and I would have crushed it. But you took that, I think that piece came with a salmon little fishy too, so it was just devastating to see you take that from me. And then at the end, I should have gone for a hawk too. I don't know, my internet was cutting in and out, so I don't know if there was a hawk available. Yeah, I should have thrown a hawk on there and salvaged some points, but I never did that. But that moment when you took that, my heart, you guys could probably see it, like I just sank. I probably shrunk like 5 inches, and my heart got smaller, and I just wanted to leave.
I'm curious to hear Tim's answer because I think I know what it's going to be.
Well, that's funny, Chris, because I don't have a specific moment. What I found about this game as far as a moment was throughout the idea that there's a constant battle for, do you care about the wildlife, or do you care about the landscape and what you're picking? And the whole game, even though I was looking at the wildlife goals, I was always trying to make sure that the landscape that I picked, fit in, and it tried to tie in the most ways possible. And I loved, because it makes me happy, because then I'm looking at my whole entire habitat, and all the habitats just flow together. There's a big group of glaciers, and there's a big group of prairie, and there's a big group of rivers and all of that stuff. And about halfway through the game, I'm looking over at your guys. I don't know what you guys are doing for animals. I'm not trying to min-max it and score that all out, but I'm just looking at this jumble of habitats around everybody else's places, and I'm just like, I've got this game in the bag. I've won it. I know I'm going to win it. I don't really know I'm going to win it because it's my first game, and I don't know how the scoring is going to work out, but it just feels so good to me. I'm still doing my animal thing, but I'm really focused on just making these landscapes work out. And we get to the final scoring, and we're going through one by one, all the animals, all the all the landscape scoring and all that stuff. And I did win it, not by that much, but that's where it came down. And it was fun for me to just be like, I feel like I've got something I'm putting together here that looks good. I'm kind of managing to pull together both these goals. And that wasn't happening across the board. So I don't know. To me, it was just like kind of recognizing pretty early, like, what's the puzzle you have to do here? You have to combine these 2 things. You have to make them both work. You can't focus on one. And you can't, I only ended up with 2 bears in my whole habitat. I had to, at some point, decide, bears are not going to be my thing this time. I got to do these other things. So there's just so many little puzzle pieces that you got to kind of figure out on the fly without a lot of future information. And to me, I liked it. So it wasn't just one moment, but the whole game tonight, I just had a fun time and a very satisfactory experience of going through the puzzle and kind of learning it as it goes. And it was a blast.
Very satisfactory. No, I was just going to comment on how satisfactory the game was.
It's very satisfactory. It was just slightly above mediocre. The in-game scoring was fantastic here. I felt like I had a great game too. I think we all did. If Chris and I were 1 salmon away from, I think Chris had an extra 6 points waiting for him if he got that salmon. Since I would have connected 2 of my 3 salmon runs, I think it would have been like 10 points for me. We were all around 88 plus or minus 7 points, I think. Tim was up at 95, and the bottom of the pack was mid to low 80s. So it was a very tight competitive game. It was easy to figure out, but not easy to figure out. The puzzle was something difficult to work, and it just felt good the way it all came together with that in-game scoring. And it made sense.
Yeah, and I like that kind of hidden. It wasn't truly hidden. Somebody could have sat there and calculated it all out, but I like that it's fairly hidden. Of you don't know exactly who's going to win because there's enough different scoring variables. On the other hand, I don't like going through that end game scoring. That kind of the practice of having to sit there and calculate everybody's stuff out. That's a little, that's a little clunky. So probably my least favorite part of the game was actually doing the end game scoring, but it all panned out at the end, and it was fun to see how it came together.
I liked it. It was like a ratchet. Oh, who got the most points for Oceans? Who got the most points for? Oh my gosh, it's neck and neck. It's coming down to the finish line. Oh, Tim takes it. Darn it, Tim. That was kind of fun for me. I enjoyed that. Kind of adding up the scores moment.
Let me ask you guys a question, because this might tie into my answer to the next question. How do you guys think this would play as a 2-player game versus a 4-player game? Do you think that it would be as fun and interesting of an experience, or do you think that it would fall short because of less players?
I think it might be a fun kind of head-to-head. You'd be able to see exactly what the other person is going for, how big their prairie is, or how big their mountains are. And you'd be able to try to block that or try to come over top of them. So, if you wanted to do it that way, I think that would be, I think that would be pretty enjoyable.
Yeah, well, I mean, I agree with you, Adam. I feel like this is a game where the number of players it's almost immaterial because you're really focusing on your own tableau. And it's similar to games like Calico or Wingspan, where it's certainly fun to have more people around a table and there's table talk and it's, there's more things happening. And that's great. But in the end, you're really focused on, can I maximize the points in what's on the table right in front of me? So I think this would be probably just as good at 3 players or 2 players or what have you. So I think I think the player number is almost immaterial.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear you guys say that, because I hadn't thought about it right up until we got to this point. And I was trying to think about would I request to play this again. And a lot of my gameplays end up being 2 players. Me and my wife will play a game together. Would I want to buy this game to fit this in? And as you guys were talking through it, it occurs to me this game is probably almost the same gameplay at 2 players, but quicker. Yeah, you probably do have a little more player interaction. You probably can see what the other person is really going for and block them a little bit better. So it's kind of funny. I think this game is going to be amazing at 2 to 4 players, because I think at 2 players you get that player interaction, a little bit less dynamic, less choices that are going to come up for you. So, but you get the player interaction instead. At 4 players, it still played so quickly. Like by the time it got back to my turn, it was like 2 minutes. Everyone had a chance to make their decision, put their tiles in, and it was back to me. It was so quick and easy to get around that I think this game plays great at all of those player counts. So, okay. Well, so why don't we jump in with that question answered? Why don't we jump in with final thoughts? And I'm going to go ahead and lead with this because I think it's pretty clear. I really loved this game. I had a great time with it. I would definitely request to play this. I think for a 45-minute game, this is fantastic, easy to get into. I could teach it to anybody. And I'm just struggling with, do I buy this or do I buy Calico? Because I think they're both great games. And honestly, I think this is the more accessible game. I think more people will get in and feel comfortable jumping into this game. The rules are a little bit less obscure. Those pattern rules in Calico, a little tougher to get to. So I think if I was going to buy one of these 2, I would buy Cascadia. I think I will probably buy Cascadia, but I might want to buy Calico too because I love that game as well. But this game was so much fun for the weight and the size of it. Really enjoyed it. What about you, Chris? Would you request to play Cascadia again?
Before I answer that, it's interesting that you said you thought this one was the more accessible. I honestly would have thought the exact opposite. I would have thought Calico was slightly more accessible.
Well, I would say that Calico, for me, the pattern rules in that were hard to grok. They were hard to understand exactly what I needed to do, and they were hard to figure out that puzzle. And this one, the puzzle was pretty clear. So that's why I said this was more accessible. I think I could teach this game a little bit easier. I think people playing it for the first time would understand what their objectives were just a little bit easier than Calico.
Yeah, no, I can see that because some of they're pretty challenging understanding the placement bonuses, particularly the design bonuses in Calico. Yeah. So the answer is that I probably would not ask to play this game again. And not because the game wasn't great. I had a lot of fun playing it, the same way that I have a lot of fun playing Calico when I play it. But it's not my first choice. This is just not my type of game. I like a game that tells a story. And these really abstract, puzzly games just don't tell that much of a story. It was beautiful. It was fun. It's also a nice midweight game. So it's the kind of thing that you can pull out when you have somebody over who's kind of new to games, or you don't want to spend 3 hours playing a big epic game of Cthulhu Wars or Eclipse. It has a place in the ecosystem of gaming for me, but it's not something that I would run out and say, oh, hey, you guys, we got to play this.
Chris, let me ask you a question. All the animal tokens, they're not wood tokens, but they're actually big plastic minis that you place on your board. What's your answer then?
If they were actual animals, I'd be all about it. I want to put an actual hawk on my board, and I'll be down. Or moose, as Tim refers to them. Hey, and one other thing, I actually had 2 other points that I wanted to make here, completely irrelevant to anything else. But for one, sympathy to Tim, because there was one point where, and I have less sympathy because he actually ended up winning the game, but he called for a rules judgment from the group, and we gave him one. And then at the end, Adam, who I think wasn't there for the original rules call, said, hey, wait, that's not how it works. So Tim lost probably 5 or 6 points, I think maybe 8 points because of that rules call.
Anyway. So I probably gave up.
Still won, so screw you. But, sorry,
Chris.
Tim. And number 2, I came in by like a good 10, 15 minutes faster
Yes.
in my turns than anybody else in this game. Just saying.
Amazing.
Chris, you were on fire tonight with a turn. You were like,
If I'd won, that would have meant
snatching it up.
something.
On the other hand, Steve, he just wanted to tell stories on his turn. So that was, like you had an easy win on this one. So.
It's like being at the campfire.
I was appreciating Steve's stories tonight. I don't know where those came from, but they were fantastic. For me, I would absolutely request to play this game. I had so much fun. Light rules overhead. I think you could play it in easily under an hour, so it fits. It'll make it to the table. If you got 45 minutes, an hour, boom. The setup is next to nothing on this game. Grab some tiles. You got a bag full of animals, and you're ready to go. You don't even really need like a huge table to play this thing. You play it like at the park, at the pub, on the bar stool, wherever. I love this game.
Awesome. All right. Sounds good. Well, that'll wrap up our conversation on Cascadia. Chris is going to share a Cascadia-themed cocktail. We'll discuss some other games that have been on our table, and we'll look at some of upcoming games in our future take segment right after this. Welcome back. So, Chris, what do you have for us today? We're in the Pacific Northwest, and we need a cocktail to go along while we're playing Cascadia. What are we drinking?
Hey, so this week's game was Cascadia, of course, which we've been talking about. And this game is all about the natural wonder and beauty of the Pacific Northwest. But as you all know, the Northwest is known not just for its amazing natural beauty, but also for its amazing food and drink as well. It's clearly the coffee capital of the United States, but it's also a place where you can't take 2 steps without tripping over a great local brewery or a distiller. So clearly I had a lot of directions that I could have gone with this week's cocktail. But I wanted to go somewhere a little bit unexpected. And so I thought, what captures the mystery and allure of the Pacific Northwest better than anything else? Bigfoot, like obviously, right? This guy's been the Northwest hairy ambassador for just about forever, and while he doesn't show up in Cascadia, you know that this is a game that would make him feel right at home. So, on to the drink. I don't know the whole backstory here, but based on my internet research, which is, extensive, in about 2014, the Alamo Drafthouse was holding a Bigfoot movie party and needed a signature drink for that evening, and the Yeti Bait cocktail was born. It's a little smoky, it's a little sweet, and it's just the kind of thing that would make Bigfoot stop into town for a cold one before heading back on his way on the trail. So here's what you need. First of all, bourbon. Any kind will do, or even a nice rye whiskey, or whatever whiskey you have on hand is perfectly good. Mezcal is the second thing. Tequila is also fine. It won't give you that smoky kick that the mezcal will, but I've done it with tequila, and it's perfectly good. Sweet vermouth, and maple syrup, and finally, Peychaud's bitters. If that doesn't sound familiar to you, Peychaud's is an anise-flavored bitters that you can pick up at pretty much any grocery or liquor store, and not to be confused with the more well-known Angostura bitters, which everybody knows. This one's a little bit less well-known, but equally available at the store. You're going to take yourself 1.5 ounces of the whiskey, 3/4 of an ounce of the mezcal or tequila, 1/4 ounce each of the vermouth and the maple syrup, and 4 dashes of your bitters. Mix them all together in a rocks glass full of ice, then head out into the forest, take off your shoes, and enjoy some alone time. One aside here, for those who aren't familiar with the Alamo Draft House, it's a Texas chain that has great food, great drinks, and I think they're actually now all over the country, and Los Angeles, and I believe they have some back east as well. But if you're not familiar, a lot of fun, worth going there, and maybe you can pick yourself up a Yeti bait.
Chris, isn't the Alamo Draft House it's a movie house too, right?
Very nice, Chris.
It is. Movie house. They have movies and food. And one of the most fun things I think I've ever done in my life, basically the equivalent of Mystery Science Theater, but live. They showed the movie. They had live comedians in the front of the theater, talking smack about the movie. I think it was Braveheart. Absolute blast. But they do a lot of fun things at the Alamo Draft House. So check it out. See if there's one near you. Absolutely worth looking at if you have one nearby.
So pretty typical, I completely messed up the drink tonight. Chris gave us the recipe earlier. I looked at the ingredient list and I was like, I've got all that stuff for sure. And then I went to make it right before game night. And I realized I don't have any sweet vermouth. I've got dry vermouth. So I texted Chris and I was like, hey, is this going to work? He's like, nope, absolutely not. And I said, too late. I'm going to make it anyway. So I put the dry vermouth in there and I drank my drink and it just tasted like bourbon. Until I got down to the bottom, and then it tasted 100% like maple syrup because I probably just didn't mix it at all. Still, fantastic drink to go with the night. I felt the theme dripping or pouring out of my glass the entire night, but probably not the way that Bigfoot intended. So
Tim had a maple syrup drink with a whiskey floater.
That's right.
I like this pattern of Chris having these beautiful drink recipes all laid out, and then Tim just coming up slightly short every time, not quite getting it right, but going with it anyway, making his own little variant, his own little house rules on Chris' drink.
It's all about variance. You may not have had the same drink I did, but you had something unique, and it was your own.
Right on. And the reality is that we don't have a rule book to go back and check what the designer intended. So maybe my drink was the right one. Who knows? All right. Well, all right. Let's jump into our On the Table segment where we're going to talk about the games that we have been playing this week. So, Adam, anything that you've had to the table this week?
Yes, Tim, I have been playing Battle for Rokugan. That game is designed by Molly Glover and Tom Jolly, and the version I have is published by Fantasy Flight Games. I've had this game on my shelf for, 2 years or something like that. And I finally got it out. A little bit of inspiration by Board Game Barrage. They were talking about it recently. So I got it out on the table. It's a chits on a map game. There's so it's an area control. There's about up to, I forget how many factions there are, but it plays up to 5 players. And I think there's 6 or 7 factions that you can be. All of them have a slight asymmetry to them, and little different powers that mix it up a little bit. What you're doing is you're drafting 5 little actions out of this whole, what do I want to say, a chit pile.
This game is a total chit pile.
Wait, Adam, are you sure it's not is it a chit house?
This game, there's a pile of chits everywhere. It's crazy. But you're getting your hands in there, you're digging them out, and you're putting them in front of you. And then you're going to put them on the board. And you put them on the board face down. So everyone's kind of going around, in turn order, clockwise order, putting these out there, these little actions that you're going to do when the reveal phase comes along. And some of them are little bluff tokens. So some of them are just like, haha, fooled you, not doing anything here. You just wasted your action thinking I was going to do something cool. There's a little peace token that eliminates any kind of attack on that specific territory. You're like, nope, we're just going to do a little peaceful time this time. In addition to the chittiness, there's also a little bit of side cards to go with it. You get, I think it's a couple scout cards, and then this other card, I forget what it's called, but so these scout cards, they let you look at one of the player's tokens, take a little peek, put it right back down. Once you use it, boom, it's gone for the game. The other card is you get to look at it, and then you discard it. That action is gone from the game. That person doesn't even get to do that action. So you have 2 scouts, and then this other super card that gets rid of 1 action. In addition to that, as you get control of these territories, you get to take control of the territory card. And those are, you use them once and then they're out of the game. So whoever gets control of these territories first has access to these little territory cards. Again, gives you a little special power, special bonus. And that's how the game works. It's 5 rounds. It's pretty quick. It's bluffy, and it's area control. The production is beautiful despite not having miniatures, Chris. It's watercolor. It has a nice theme. It's fantastic. And it has everything I like in a game. I think we would love it. I'm going to bring it to TimCon. I'm going to push for it. Whether it gets played or not, we'll see. But it's a great game. That's Battle for Rokugan Fantasy Flight.
That sounds like it's going to be a great experience, and I think I'm going to be complete shit at it. But I'm going to give it a shot anyway.
I'm looking at this, Adam, and this does not look simple to me. I mean, maybe I'm misunderstanding something here, but you said it was a relatively simple game, and it looks pretty freaking complex.
It flows. So yeah, it does. There's a lot of things. I don't know. There's kind of a lot of things going on, but not really. It's pretty simple, kind of repetitive action. Kind of do the same thing in 5 rounds, and it makes sense. It all comes together nicely. I'm sure I'll give it a horrible rules explanation when we're trying to make it more complex than it has to be, but I think after one or 2 rounds, it'll make a lot of sense. It'll click, and there's just going to be a lot of fun moments if we get this game to the table.
Cool.
Right on. Sounds good. Well, all right, let me jump in. So I requested a review copy of One Deck Dungeon from Asmati Games, and Asmati Games sent me a copy as well as the expansion, which is One Deck Dungeon Forest of Shadows. And I want to talk a little bit about this game. Now, I did mention it in last week's episode, which was our top 5 solo games, and this came in as my number 3 top solo game, even though I've only had this game for a couple of weeks. But I want to give you guys a little bit of an explanation of how it plays and what I like about it, as well as some of the things that I wasn't so hot on with One Deck Dungeon. One Deck Dungeon is really simple. It's a very small box. It's a box of about 2 kind of standard playing deck cards size in width. And so one half of the box is just this big pile of dungeon cards and a few other cards. And then the other half of the box is a bunch of little tokens that come with it. But basically in One Deck Dungeon, it is a dungeon crawler in every sense of the word, except it eliminates the one thing that I hate about dungeon crawlers. I hate when you have to spend actions and try to figure out how to move around the dungeon. And One Deck Dungeon gets rid of that, because basically what happens is you start the game with a face-down deck of cards. You start the game with 1 or 2 characters that you're playing, which are asymmetric. They all have their own skills and their own powers. And all you do on your turn is you flip over dungeon cards, and then you decide which one you're going to explore. Now, this does a couple things really cool. First of all, the dungeon cards that you flip over, the kind of the exploration cards, are either going to be an encounter, kind of a combat encounter, or they're going to be a trap. And so the combat encounters are the ones that you're going to see the most often. It's going to be some kind of monster you explore in the dungeon, and you run into this monster. When you flip over that card, you can decide whether you want to attack it or you want to run away. When you attack it, basically what happens is that the encounter card has a number of squares or rectangles on it that represent the dice that you have to roll to try to beat this card. Your character card has 3 different skills, 3 different types of skills, or up to 3 different types of skills it can have. It's going to be yellow, which are swords. That's going to be your strength. It's going to be purple, which is swiftness. That's going to be how fast you can move. And then it's going to be blue, which is mana. That's going to be your magical power. So each of the characters that you can play have different strengths in those areas, and you can get better at those areas. But let's say I flip over this fire elemental card that I'm looking at, and it has 5 little boxes on it. It has a square with a 3 blue, a 3 purple, a 6 blue, a 6 purple, and an 11 blue. But the 11 blue is a rectangle. So the squares mean that you can only put 1 dice on it, and the rectangles mean that you can put any number of dice on it. Now my character is going to roll dice equal to the skills that it has. So if my character is a rogue, for example, and it starts with 1 yellow sword, 4 purple boots, which is swiftness, and 2 blue mana, I would roll 4 purple dice, 1 yellow dice, and 2 blue dice. And then based on the numbers that I get, I can assign those dice to the squares on the monster that I'm combating that turn. And each of those squares on the monster tile has a negative effect. So if you can cover it up, great. Then you won't feel that negative effect. But if you don't cover it up, then you're going to get the negative effect. In the base game, most of the squares will show either a shield, which means that you have to cover that before you can cover any other squares, or it's going to show a little an hourglass, which means you're going to lose time, and I'll explain that in a second, or it's going to show hearts. So if you can't cover that square, you're going to take damage. And your character also has a number of heart spaces on it, or tokens, so that if you take a certain number of damage, your character is going to die. So your goal is to try to beat these monsters, because if you can beat them and cover up all those things, you're going to get a benefit. And this is where the most fun of the game comes. Every time you beat one of these little cards, the card is a multi-use card. It has 3 different benefits showing on it. On the left-hand side, it has what's considered an item. And so you would slide that under your character card on the left-hand side and it would add to the attributes. So I mentioned the strength, swiftness, or mana. Well, it might have a mana symbol and a heart symbol. So you'd slide that to the left-hand side of your character card, and now you have an extra blue dice you can roll in the future and an extra heart you can gain. Or on the bottom, it's going to have a skill, and a skill is kind of like a special power. Usually what that means is that you can take a dice that you've rolled and convert it to something else. The one I happen to be looking at right now says you could take 1 purple dice and change any or all of your dices to 4s. So you can now, by placing 1 purple dice on this card, you can take a whole bunch of your 1s and 2s and turn them into 4s, which will help you combat the next character that you're fighting. And then the last thing that you could take by beating this character is the experience points, and those are kind of listed at the top, and it's usually 2, 3, or 4 experience points. So if you take the 4 experience points, then you can add that up, and in the future you can level up, which will give you some additional potions, or it can allow you to carry more items and get more skills and things like this. This is all really traditional dungeon crawler terminology, pretty much standard high fantasy. But this game does it so slickly. But I can sit down, I can play this game in somewhere between 5 minutes if I'm doing poorly and I lose quickly, or 30 minutes if I manage to get through the whole dungeon, get to the boss, and beat it. But every single card you flip over is about a 30-second encounter. It's a fun puzzle because not only do you roll the dice and see what you can place on there, but you can use the skills that are, your character starts with a skill, you can get more skills to go with it. You can pick up these little potion tokens and spend those potion tokens for a special power in there.
Yeah, quick question before we keep going. Is this, you talked about the solo, is this strictly solo or can you play multiplayer?
So this is a 1 to 2 player game. And the way that it differentiates is that if you play 1 player and you play with 1 character, your character's a little bit stronger. If you play with 2 characters, and also anytime that you defeat a monster, you get whatever benefit it is. You would get items or you get skills added to that 1 character. If you play a two player game, you would flip the characters over and they're a little bit weaker. So one of them might have no strength but more mana. The other one will have some strength and no mana. So you kind of try to, find a combination that supplements. But when you defeat a monster, only one of you gets the benefit from it. And you have to decide every time who gets the benefit. But you roll all the dice from both the characters. So it balances out pretty well. You're going to have a little bit more ease of defeating those early monsters, but you're not going to get as strong over the course of the game because you don't get as many benefits per character. So yeah, it's a 1 or 2 player. You can play 4 players with this game if you get 2 sets or get the base box plus an expansion box, which then gives you the cards that you need to build a deck for 4 players. I'm glad you asked that question because here's my thought on it. This is an amazing 1 player game, and you can play this with a single character or you can play with 2 characters, and it plays basically the same. The 2 characters give you a little bit more variety, but some tougher decisions on what you do when you get the treasures from the monster. But they're pretty balanced. They play almost the same as far as I can tell after about 24 plays with a mix of these. I did try playing this multiplayer with my wife. And if you've ever listened to this podcast, you know that I'm not a big fan of multiplayer games. I don't like quarterbacking games. There are some multiplayer games that fix quarterbacking. This game doesn't do that.
Multiplayer cooperative game.
Cooperative games. Sorry, thank you. Thank you for clarifying that because I'm talking about cooperative games.
I was like, wow, Tim plays a lot of games with us for hating multiplayer games.
No, I like multiplayer competitive. I don't like multiplayer cooperative. So as a multiplayer cooperative game, if you don't feel like you have a worry about quarterbacking, if 2 people want to sit there and work this puzzle together, it's totally fine. But if you are concerned about quarterbacking, there's no fix for that in this game. Both people are going to sit down and one person's probably going to tell you exactly what we're going to do, and this is how we do it. So personally, I wouldn't play this multiplayer. I did try it, and it's not a fit for me and for the people that I play with multiplayer. But solo, fantastic in any combination. There's a whole bunch more I could say about the mechanisms other than it is streamlined, it's slick, it's easy to learn. I learned it out of the rule book, which is maybe a little bit clunky, but it took me about 15 minutes to get the rules down, and I had to reference the rules a couple times while playing, but that's how quick the game is. So even though it wasn't perfectly clear on the first playthrough and the way the rulebook was laid out, I still picked it up right away. And then the next time I played, I didn't have to reference the rulebook at all. So really streamlined. If you want to play solo, I would definitely recommend this game. A couple things I will say about the production of the game, which I think is worthwhile noting. First of all, The art in this, every monster has a little different monster art, and it's all really nice. It's all really, kind of traditional high fantasy art. There's this glooping ooze monster that you can face that is adorable. It's got like cross eyes and a face looking like, why are you attacking me on it? And then some like really creepy monsters and stuff like that. All looks fine. But one thing I wanted to call out about the art is that the characters, you can play one of 5 characters out of the base box, and then there's another 5 in the expansion, but they're all women, and they're all well-represented women with the type of armor that an adventurer would wear, the type of clothes and armor, and they're different shapes and sizes and colors, and the representation in this game is just fantastic. I know that was intentional by Asmati Games and by Chris, who designed it, so I wanted to give props for that. And that's the reason why I requested to get a review copy, because I'd heard that about the game, but I'm just so pleased the gameplay itself is so much fun. 2 little dings on the production here. Okay, so there's just a few things you have to track. Aside from the cards, you have some little heart tokens to represent your life. Heart tokens are great. They're little clear acrylic hearts, really nice little tokens. The dice are a bunch of different colors, blue, yellow, pink, and then there's black dice. There's a way that you can manipulate your dice to turn into wild dice, which are black ones. All fine. Plenty of dice in there. Little 6-sided clear dice. All look good. But then there's the potion tokens, which you have to, when you start the game, you start with 1 potion token, and as you level up in the game, you can get more potions. They're represented by little white cubes. And the potions on the cards art is purple potion looking things. So at minimum, they should have made the potion tokens purple to make it a little bit more of a link there. So minor thing. I think I'm probably going to try to buy upgraded potions for my copy because I like this game enough and I'll be playing it, and those white potion tokens are a serious letdown. Other than that, the production is fantastic for what is about a $20 game, and everything in here is exactly what you would expect.
So, important question for you, Tim. I see one of the monsters is a Yeti. Would you use the Yeti bait drink when you're playing this game to lure that monster in and capture it?
Well, I'm glad you asked that question, Adam, because I probably wouldn't. But that brings me to the fact that aside from the monster encounters that you can have in this game, which I was talking about, there's another type of card you can run into, which is a trap. And traps are fun because traps you look at, and for example, I'm looking at a card that looks like a boulder rolling down and kind of a hallway, kind of like Indiana Jones style, right? So it's a trap that you just triggered. But on this one, you have 2 options. You can either slow time, so that's a spell you can cast, so it's a blue ability, or you can run past it, and that's a purple ability, of course, which would require you to have, swiftness and boots. And so you can look at this card when you encounter it, and you can decide whether you want to spend the blue dice, but only the blue dice, to try to beat this encounter. But with slow time, you also have to spend 3 time on it. Or you can run past it, and that's just purple dice. You would just roll your purple dice, and if you can beat it, then you get past it. If you don't, you get a bunch of negative effects. So that's really fun. There's a fun decision point in the deck when you get to one of these traps, because you have to pick in advance which dice you're going to roll, and you don't get to roll other dice and try to mitigate them. Now, I mentioned losing time here, and that's one of the other things that can happen. Aside from taking damage, losing time means that you flip cards. Anytime you see one of these little hourglass tokens, you flip cards off the dungeon deck into a discard pile. And why that matters is because you're going to play this game until you've gone through the deck 3 times. And each of those 3 times is a different level of the dungeon. At the starting level of the dungeon, you have this little dungeon card that represents the dungeon you're going into. There's 1 additional dice spot that you have to fill in. And then once you get to the second level, you've run through the deck, you get to the next level, now another space reveals. And so you have 1 more dice space that you have to fill in every round. And so the time matters. So it's one of the resources in the game is that you don't want to spend time, because you want to spend as much time on that top layer, which is easier to beat, to get as many monsters and get as many extra skills and potions and level ups and stuff like that in the first round. So anytime you lose time, then you're going to flip cards over and you're going to have to get to that second dungeon. And at the beginning of every turn, you flip 2 cards over, which indicates that you've spent time there. So it's a really clever mechanism, not only of like having to make a decision, do I do this thing and potentially risk spending time, or do I skip it and move on to the next monster? But also it means that the deck is so variable, because you play with the same deck of cards every time, but you're not going to see about it, like 50% of the cards, because a lot of them just get flipped over for losing time. So the next time you look at this deck, you're going to see a completely different set of monsters and skills and benefits from these monsters that you get. Once you get to the bottom of the 3rd level and you've beat all the monsters to these levels, you flip the dungeon card over and there's a big boss fight on there. And so the boss fight is what you've been working towards the whole time. And it's super challenging to do, and you do it over multiple rounds. And you have to continue to get dice on there and put damage on it before it beats you. It is such an epic adventure in a tiny deck of cards. I've spoken about this a long time. I want to mention one last thing. I did also get the Forest of Shadows expansion with here, which is cool because it gives you another 5 characters with unique skills and unique combinations of powers on there. But it gives you a whole nother dungeon deck. And you can either play either of the decks separately. The Forest of Shadows dungeon deck has another negative effect, which is poison, which kind of builds up over time, and you take a risk. If you have poison counters, then you're going to take damage. But you can also take half of the deck from the base box, and you can take half the decks of the Forest of Shadows box and shuffle them together, and then you've got a dungeon that's a complete combination of unique monsters and unique powers. A lot of variability just in the base box. You add in this expansion box, and it's basically like a whole nother game with a whole bunch more variability in it. And both the games come with a campaign mode where it's like a whole bunch of roll and write pads that you can just kind of check off as you do certain things. As you go down a level, you can check off some boxes depending on what challenge of dungeon you're taking. If you beat the boss monster, you get to check off some boxes, and then it's going to give you skills for your next game. So it's so fun. There's so many ways to play this game. I've literally, in the last 3 weeks since I've had it, I've played it about 25 times. I've played a variety of different methods and different modes, and I'm going to be playing this game forever. It's fantastic for what you get in these boxes. So that has been what's been on my table. One Deck Dungeon by Chris Selslick and Asmati Games. And if a solo game is something you're interested in, something that's short and plays quickly, check it out. If you're not into solo gaming and don't want to do cooperative, then this isn't the game for you. But otherwise, it's great for the price, and you're going to get a lot of game out of here.
Very nice. I'm getting like a little Zelda feel from it, just looking at the little icons and graphics and stuff. So that's bringing me back, and that's giving me some good feelings already.
Yeah, and I would say that there's a little bit of a thematic link there, but what this game actually feels like to me is Slay the Spire, which is a current modern app game. It's a roguelike game, right? Yeah, and I don't even know where that name comes from.
I do know where this game comes from. It's from an old video game. I don't know if it was Atari or predates Atari, where you just had to make a run, and you ran. You started here and you just went for it, and if you didn't make it, boom, you restart at the very beginning, and you had to start all over again. And it's a style of game. So there's the latest one that is getting some hype is this game called Hades, and so there's variants on it. You run through this dungeon or whatever it is, and you're just making a run. You're going through fighting bad guys, and you keep fighting until you die or until you win. And in the case of Hades, you might pick up some bonuses along the way, or you might power up. So the next time you run through, you're a little bit better and a little bit stronger. But in the original one, you would just die, have to restart and try it all over again, and hope that your mental acumen and your dexterity was enough to get you through. So that's where the term roguelike comes from.
Yep, and I just looked up Wikipedia and confirmed all of what Adam just said. So
I got that right?
Wow.
Yes, you did. And so that's exactly what this game is, right? And it's just like Slay the Spire, which is a game I absolutely love. It's the only computer-based game, like the only digital game I'm playing for the last year, because it's so much fun. And this game is exactly that. Now, it has the same challenge that something like Slay the Spire does, that you can start the run, and the random rewards that you get from the monsters you beat are not as good, or they don't combo together. Maybe the monster's a little bit tougher than you expected. So you start that run and you lose by the 4th monster, but you just wasted 7-8 minutes. And that's exactly how this game is. Sometimes the random luck of the early monsters you draw and how your dice roll, they don't work out for you. You don't really get to build that momentum and kind of push your way through. But then you've only wasted 5-6 minutes to get through there. So you start again, and then the next time, you've got a good run started, and now you're 10-15 minutes in, and things are starting to get tense, because if you can beat this one monster with this run roll, you're going to be set up, you're going to get the one skill you need. And if you beat it, then you're like, okay, I'm good to go. But it still gets, tougher. So it's kind of like that. You definitely are a little bit at the whim of the luck of how things come in this game. but it's still a fun puzzle every time, and it goes so quickly that if things don't go your way, it's okay. You just move on, you start over again, you do it over again. So that was One Deck Dungeon. Chris, what have you been playing? What's on your table this week?
Yeah, this has been a great week for me. I met a local gamer who's got a little crew that he games with and had a super fun time playing a game called Watergate, which is probably familiar to a lot of folks listening right now because it's 134 on the BGG all-time list. So I thought that was kind of cool, especially for a relatively lightweight two-player game. He also let me borrow his copy of it, so I've played it with my wife a couple times. And holy cow, what a cool game this is. It's a two-player game only. One player plays the Washington Post, and one player plays the Nixon administration. And the Nixon administration wins by holding out long enough to survive through the end of its term. The Washington Post wins by connecting two informants to the president. The board is laid out like on the left side, it's got or depending on which side you're sitting on one side, it has an evidence track where pieces of evidence get laid out and move up or down the track depending on who's getting control of that piece of evidence. And on the rest of the board, it's this very web-like series of connections that the evidence gets placed on usually by the newspaper, but also by the president in order to connect the president, who's at the center, with the informants that are on the outside. It's super simple. It's about a 10-minute teach, and it is so incredibly deep in terms of its history and its theme. I couldn't believe they packed this much theme into one small box in a lightweight game. And I have had such a fun time playing it. I won't get into a lot of details on it, but it's a tug of war on getting these pieces of information. The administration gets to know at all times what's on the board because, of course, they know what's happening behind the scenes. And the newspaper's trying to suss all of that out. And the tug of war trying to get the information out to the public versus the administration trying to pull it back and keep it secret is just super fun, super thematic. And the whole time I felt like I was right there in the middle of the Watergate scandal. The cards actually have interesting pieces of history on them. And really interestingly, the instruction book has a great deal of history on it, which is absolutely fascinating. So if you're a history buff, you like a simple game, you want a two-player game, absolutely this is one to check out. So far I've played it, I think 4 or 5 times, and I've lost every time. So it's got a little bit of challenge to it. Truthfully, I don't know how much replayability it would have after a while, but so far I've played 4 or 5 games, and I haven't got bored of it yet. I still love it. So if you know a history buff and you want to get him into someone who's not a deep gamer or someone who is a deep gamer and is a history buff, and you want to try out something fun with them, this is a great game to start with. So I've been having a terrific time with it. And the game is designed by Matthias Kramer. The artists were Clemens Franz and Alfred Victor Schultz, and it's published by Frosted Games.
You were alive for this whole thing, which I wasn't there for. So I wanted to ask you, which side do you prefer playing with? Do you prefer playing as the Nixon side or as, I think the other side is the press, the Washington Post? And have you found, has one side won more often than the other side?
So first of all, Adam, I was like 1. And second,
well, you actually were alive for this. Oh my God.
No, you were joking? Okay, no, I actually was alive for part of it. I think. So I've played, of the games I played, the only time that I won, I did win one time. The only time that I won was when I was playing as the newspaper. So I feel like it is slightly skewed maybe in favor of the newspaper, which is appropriate because, justice should win in the end. But it actually made it really intriguing to me to try to play as the administration and win. And there are some pretty clear paths to victory for the administration because really, all they have to do is stay alive. They have to stop the newspaper from getting the information out to the public and making those connections. So I feel like I need to play it a few more times to really kind of make this happen. But there's a way to do it, and I'm really intrigued by trying to get that done. So I'm looking forward to playing this one some more.
Tim, we've played this one a few times. What are your thoughts on it? Did you specifically feel slimy if you played as the Nixon side?
From my memory, Adam, I think we only played it one time.
Okay.
And I really enjoyed my first play of it. The exploration here was really fun, but that was with not knowing anything that was in the decks at all. And to answer your question about replayability, I'm a little bit torn on this because I think there is not a lot that you're going to discover. Once you've played the game a couple times, you're going to know what's in both decks, which is, means you're not going to get any of those big surprises that happens from the other side. But on the other hand, then I think it turns into more of a chess-like match where you know exactly what they could have in their hand, and you have to play the right card at the right time and kind of take a risk and say, if I play this now, I might be risking that I don't have it later when I need it for another card, but it's going to give me a little bit of momentum this time. And so I think the game does have a lot of replayability for someone that wants to go back to it a lot, and it's got a lot of replayability for someone that wants to just explore it once in a while and check in on it. If I remember right, I think I played the newspaper and you played Nixon at the time, which makes perfect sense because I am the right and you are the wrong in our gaming partnership.
Fair enough.
No, I think that's awesome that you've experienced it, Chris. I did want to ask you, what did Rachel think of this game now that she's played it a little bit?
She liked it, but didn't love it. The funny thing is that for someone who started as a non-gamer and was kind of reluctantly involved in our hobby, that the games that she really gets into are the more in-depth, deep, really thinky kind of games like Terraforming Mars, Tapestry, things like that. So I think this one was relatively light for her. But she had fun. We played a couple of games of it, and she killed me once. So
one of the things I remember about the game, my one play of it was that we're playing and it's kind of a tug of war, and then Adam plays a card that just like blows my whole strategy away, like makes a huge movement against me, and I was just like, that's ridiculous. That card is overpowered. I can't believe he has that card. I'm clearly not going to win this game. And then I draw my next hand, and I've got a card that just does like so much stuff going the other direction, and it's just one of those games that it can't possibly feel balanced until you've played it enough times and got like a statistical number on it. So it's hard to know whether you would ever feel like completely beat down by one side until you've played it enough on both sides and seen, like, okay, yeah, Chris always loses. It's because he's just a shitty player. It has nothing to do with the side he's playing. And but it's a fun game. It's something I'd like to explore.
I probably am a bad player, but I think at this point I've learned enough of the cards that I can say that they seem reasonably balanced, and I think that if I came back to it now, I could probably play as the administration and have a reasonable chance of winning. And honestly, it's like anytime you play the bad guy, whether you're playing Star Wars Rebellion or what have you, it's fun. It's fun to play as the bad guy every once in a while, and getting in there and being Nixon trying to block the press from finding out information. And there's it's a kick. It's a lot of fun.
I always feel off when I'm playing as the rebels in Rebellion. It just doesn't feel right. They're trying to overthrow this peaceful government that just wants order in the galaxy, and it just doesn't feel good at all to be the rebels in that game. You're right, Chris.
What's their deal, man?
Okay, so just as I mentioned earlier about Adam, I mean, listen, I kind of see what you're saying, Chris, and I like playing the Empire because it's a fictional government that has, cool comic-y bad guys. Playing Nixon does feel dirty, and I have a hard time with playing something historical. It'd be like playing a World War II game and taking the role of Hitler and trying to do all of the horrible things he did. Like there's elements of I do think that's one of the challenges with that game is that I wouldn't want to play Nixon because I think he's a slimy dirtball, and just wouldn't be fun for me to be in that situation.
Yeah, no, I get that. I get that, and it's definitely, if I was judging either side on the historical, the righteousness of the situation, clearly Nixon was in the wrong there. But if you're able to remove yourself a little bit, it can make for a heck of a fun game.
I think this game's great, Chris, and I played it under 5 times. But I think, Tim, you nailed it with it goes from kind of the holy cow, I can't believe you have that card, to knowing what cards are in there and how to combo up, how to effectively use your cards together to have that forward-looking kind of feel to the game and know what you want to do. So I think this game has a lot of explorability and replayability. So I miss this game. Now that we're talking about it, I want to play it again.
And let me just add, you can get in a good solid game of this in 20, 30 minutes. So it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of theme. It's really super cool. And you can get it in 30 minutes. So there's a lot to be said for that.
All right. Yeah, right on. So let's talk about our future takes, and that is where we're going to look at games that are coming up. Maybe they're on Kickstarter, maybe they're available for pre-order, or you've just heard the publisher announce them. You guys got anything to talk about tonight, Chris? Let's circle right back to you. Anything that you're excited about?
The funny thing is that I do have something I'm very excited about, and it has absolutely nothing to do with a new game. It's actually a game that's been out there for a while, and in fact has been at BGG's number 21 ranking for a while now. But it's new to me because we talked about it on last week's episode when we talked about solo gaming. And I am someone who's never really thought deeply about solo gaming, and as a co-host of a board gaming podcast, I feel almost embarrassed to say this, that I haven't thought that much about solo gaming. We talked about Nemesis, and I have looked into it some more, listened to some reviews of it. I am so excited about this game now. I think I need to go out and get it. The reason is because it just sounds like there is so much awesome theme in this game that it brings the story. I mean, storyline is so much of what that I look for in a game. And this game brings it from everything that I've heard. And traditionally, I have not loved co-op or semi-co-op games. But when I think about this kind of a game as being, solo, I can play it by myself. It's almost like playing a video game. It's got the big toys. It's got the cool board. It's got the storyline that's playing out as you go through the game. Especially from talking to you guys about your experiences playing solo games. Like, I'm totally down. I'm ready to try it, and this is the game that I think is going to be the one that makes it happen. Now, there's a barrier to entry that it's an extremely expensive game, but, sometimes you just have to get out there and do it. I am very much looking forward to getting myself a copy of Nemesis, learning what I understand to be the very fiddly rule set, and having a rollicking good time scaring myself half to death. So Nemesis is, and I'm going to be the ugly American here and probably really mispronounce some names, but the designer was Adam Vapinski. Artists were Peter Voskovich, Patrick Jadrosik, Eva Labak, and Andre Polteranos. And the game is published by Awaken Realms.
Chris, there's an important question that we didn't cover last week when we talked about Nemesis briefly. And we talked about your favorite Alien movie. Have you seen the last two movies in the series? The ones, the kind of the modern take.
What's the name? I wanted to talk about
Prometheus. I think Prometheus
Yes.
was the first one, and then the second one had Alien in the name, if I remember right.
Hearing the name Prometheus just enrages me, Tim.
So you didn't enjoy that at all?
I had such high hopes. I want to hear Chris's take on Prometheus.
That was the one with the big, bald white dude, right? Yeah.
The engineer.
That doesn't even...
Yeah, the engineer.
Yeah, that doesn't really count. So I'm kind of a purist on this, having seen the original one back shortly after it came out. And it's like, there was the first two, maybe three movies. Then after that, it's all kind of blah, 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 blah.
What's your take, Tim? I want to hear it.
Well, okay. So as typical, I'm going to give a counterpoint here and say that I will sit there and watch Michael Fassbender on screen at any point, and his David character in these two movies was one of the high points of his career. And I don't care if it didn't have the traditional, alien monster in Prometheus at all, and just then kind of had a subverted version of it in the second in the series. But I will sit there and watch Michael Fassbender's David all day long, and I want a sequel, and I want additional sequels to go with that series. So I loved it. I don't think it is a true part of the Alien series from that perspective. Like, I would say that there's Alien 1, 2, 3, and then this is like another series, but I love it, and I'm glad that it exists out there.
I agree with you that Michael Fassbender is amazing. I wish he was in a lot better movies.
Yeah.
But gosh, that movie, they just do so many stupid things, so many dumb decisions that don't make any sense. They travel all this way, and then there's just running into this alien construct without even thinking about stuff, popping off their masks and doing this and doing that. And it just makes no sense. There's some hilarious reviews about all the dumb things that characters do that just make absolutely zero sense. And
and I'm sure if we went back and looked at Aliens, that they all make really intelligent decisions.
It's a logical movie. It's what I would do if I encountered an alien species. It was horrifying.
Well, I actually listened to the Secret Cabal podcast review of this game in the car with my son, who's 9 years old, and he was listening to it going, that sounds really scary. And Dad, didn't you say that in the original movie there was like something that was really scary that everybody wanted to see when you were a kid? I said, yeah, that was when the alien burst out of the guy's chest. And he's like, yeah, that sounds kind of scary. That'd probably give me nightmares. And I was like, yeah, probably wouldn't, because you guys are so much more advanced these days. And it would probably look so fake to you, but it was so much fun reliving that moment.
I think I still have a better memory of the Spaceballs chest burster scene than I do of the original Alien chest burster scene at this point. It probably looks about the same. All right. Well, let me talk about a game that I am excited about coming up, and it links right into my On the Table review, but that is One Deck Galaxy. And Asmati Games is about to kickstart a new version that is a space-themed version. So if you thought One Deck Dungeon sounded interesting to you, but you don't like high fantasy, you don't want a traditional dungeon crawler, and you want a space-themed version of it, One Deck Galaxy gives you almost the same game with some fun little additional mechanisms, cool new artwork, and it's just a space-themed version of One Deck Dungeon. And that is going to be coming to Kickstarter in September. I got a confirmation from Asmati Games today on that, so you can sign up to be notified when the Kickstarter goes live. If you search for One Deck Galaxy on Kickstarter right now, you can get in on that. But looks really exciting to me, and I might be checking that out, even though I already have One Deck Dungeon.
What do they got on that thing, Tim? A Cuisinart? The game, that's a Spaceballs quote, but it's just a time. The game I am going to talk about is Dragon Prince Battlecharged. This is from a Netflix series called The Dragon Prince that I want to say my daughter watches, but I think I love it way more than my daughter does. The humor is fantastic. There is all kinds of inclusion. It's just a great series, great art, great story. So I hope the game is good. It looks like it's going to be fun and entertaining. It's got miniatures for Chris. It's got some good card play. It's got some dice, some nice components. And it looks like it's a quick little skirmish in the same vein as like Unmatched, potentially. You have these little characters, plays 2 to 6 characters. You're just going at it. It looks fantastic.
I love the production of this. This looks so cool. I'm looking at the pictures of it now.
It looks amazing,
it
right?
A lot of fun.
This game is, I don't see a designer listed. I'll keep scrolling here, but it's by Brotherwise Games, and it's available for pre-order now. And who knows when it's going to release with all the shipping stuff and this and that. But the game looks amazing.
Was this game crowdfunded, or is it just directly from the publisher? So you can
Directly from the
pre-order
publisher, yeah. So they got the IP and decided to put it out there.
Well, good. I'm all for that. Much safer than Kickstarter. So.
Where we go, one click away over on Board Game Geek. The designer is Johnny O'Neill.
All right, cool. All right, sounds good. Well, I think that will wrap up our episode today. If you are interested in chatting with us, following us on social media, we're on Twitter at BG_hot takes, at Facebook at Board Game Hot Takes, and Jen is now leading our presence on Instagram, and you can find us at BG_hot takes there as well if you wanted to see some fun pictures of the games we're playing. Otherwise, love to hear from you. Reach out to us, tell us what we got wrong, tell us what we got right, and just chat with us. I would love to connect with you on social media. Until next week, take care, everybody.
Good night, all.
Bye-bye.